What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Esper self-bounce deck for Standard. It's been a while since we looked at a Standard deck. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Modern format right now. We have the regional championships coming up and really no major Standard tournaments kind of in sight until the release of Aether Drift. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how this Esper self-bounce deck kind of figures itself out and how well it'll stay relevant in the metagame once we get Aether Drift to release. And of course, we're going to be kind of doing a little bit of a set review. We're going to be looking at some cards that I think could make an impact in Standard and some of the other Eternal formats of Magic. So if you're not already subscribed and you want to see more videos like that, where we also on the channel talk a lot about the competitive formats of Magic, really going into the Modern and Standard formats, breaking down some of the major tournaments, and giving you whatever information that you need to hopefully dominate your next RCQ. So if you want to see more videos like that and you want to see more content from me, please consider subscribing and ring that notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. It's a very easy way to support me and my content. Of course, leave a like on the video and comment down below if you've been enjoying the Standard format as a whole. I absolutely love this format. It's been pretty dynamic. I would have thought that some of the changes they made would have been mistakes to Standard. I didn't think that they necessarily needed to change them. They just needed different philosophies, and turns out, of course, I'm wrong. That's why I'm sitting here talking to a camera right now, and I'm not working at Wizards, designing, some of the new cards for the new sets and being in charge of competitive formats. But, we like to talk about Magic here. It's kind of the thing that we do, so I do appreciate any and all support. Of course, go down in the description below. You can follow me on Twitch, where we go and live stream over there playing some Magic Online. Tried to play some sweet decks that exist in Modern currently, so if that's something that interests you, go ahead and check out the stream. And finally, I want to thank the sponsor of the channel, Manatraders. If for using my code down in the description below, you can sign up for Manatraders and get 5% off your monthly subscription, where you can go there and rank cards, such as cards for this Esper self-bounce deck, and you can go play in Moto Leagues, challenges, and even participate in their free tournament series that they have every month that you can then qualify for their invitational series at the end of the year. I want to thank Manatraders for being a sponsor of the channel. They're awesome. I've been with them for over 5 years just as a customer, and I really do enjoy their service, and they're only getting better and better every month. So go ahead, check out Manatraders, use my code in the description down below, and let's go ahead and talk about this Esper self-bounce deck. So a lot of what's going on here, this deck does generate card advantage, but not necessarily card advantage the way that we know it, where we're obviously like drawing cards is kind of the I think the way that most people think about card advantage is just like they play cards that end up drawing cards, whether it's they do a thing and they draw a card, or they just specifically have you draw 2, 3, 4 cards. Now, how many times can you say draw a card? What this deck looks to do is actually play some pretty powerful cheap permanents and then use these kind of bounce effects to kind of replay those things and kind of double and triple up on those effects. So one of the things that we're trying to kind of bounce and get some value out of just up front are cards like Hopeless Nightmare. When they enter, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. So obviously getting to replay this multiple times means that you can drain your opponent for a little bit of life and keep getting cards out of their hand. Obviously it gets a lot harder to kind of interact with your opponent if it gets a lot harder to interact with your opponent when you're down 2, 3, 4 cards. We see Storm Chaser's Talent, which is a card that has seen a wide variety of play in plenty of different decks. Just a 1-mana enchantment. It makes an otter when it comes into play. Pay 4, return an instant sorcery card to your hand, and then 6, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create a 1/1 blue and red otter token with prowess. So it's a card that I would say you're not necessarily leveling up to level 2 and doing these sort of things. You kind of see that from some of the various like Tolarian Terror decks, or even the like Teamer Otters deck. But this one in particular, I mean, is just totally fine with just playing it as, 1 blue mana, make a 1/1 prowess creature. You're going to end up being able to trigger prowess a lot of the time from playing obviously your non-creature spells, like your enchantments, your Tithing Blades, things like that. To where if you just pick this up and play it and you make 2, 3, 4 otters, it's going to be nothing to play a non-creature spell, play another spell to bounce it, play another non-creature spell, and you're attacking with a few 3/3 or 4/4 otters. So pretty neat stuff there. Nowhere to Run is also essentially just a removal spell that gets around a lot of the hexproof and ward abilities that your opponents can be playing. Instant speed, 2 mana, you give a creature an opponent controls -3/-3 until end of turn, so there's no way that you can like accidentally end up killing one of your own creatures, which is really nice. A lot of the like hexproof ward abilities, there's a lot of things that you can kind of play that protect those creatures, and like Nowhere to Run works very well against some of like the Tolarian Terror stuff that's going on. of course, too, like Kaito is also a notable hexproof creature, so you can know where to run. It's not going to kill Kaito, but you're going to be able to target it again with things like Go for the Throw, and this town ain't big enough, and just kind of tempo your opponent out in that way. Speaking of Kaito, this is a deck that has picked up Kaito, Bane of Nightmares. It's a card that we talked about a long time ago in Duskmourn. I thought this card was really sweet just because it was a Planeswalker with Ninjutsu, and of course was a creature itself when it's your turn, and it has hexproof, so you're kind of insulated from the instant speed removal and your instant speed like creature removal, and you're really only vulnerable to the like sorcery speed like Planeswalker type of removal. So that was really cool. Turns out, like, you don't necessarily need to make an emblem with this to be good. You know, just being able to zero it and get some card advantage that way, or even just tapping down creatures and putting 2 stun counters on them is really huge because it just takes a creature completely out of commission for a few turns. This is a Planeswalker that you can get a lot of tempo with, and, you know, just bouncing some key creatures to, again, kind of do what this deck is trying to do, which is like bounce your own permanents, sometimes bouncing your opponent's permanents as well, and getting additional value from them. So with that said, you have some pretty good cards to return with Kaito, Bane of Nightmares. Things like Nurturing Pixie is kind of cool, so it's just like a 1-mana 1/1 flyer, but when it enters, you can turn one target non-fairy, non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and if a permanent was returned this way, it gets a +1/+1 counter on Nurturing Pixie. So this is like achieve a flying threat that you can play early on, where it kind of works something like Hopeless Nightmare, Storm Chaser's Talent. You play one of those on turn 1, you play a Pixie on turn 2, get to bounce it, and then replay it on that same turn. So then you end up having a 2/2 Pixie, and then either like 2 Otters in play, then you then get to attack for 2 with the one that you made on turn 1, or you get 2 cards out of your opponent's hand, they lose 4 life, and you still have a 2/2 flyer in play. So that's just like some of the very basic things that you can kind of do like with this card. Obviously, at most points in the game, like a 2/2 flyer just seems like it's kind of meh, but again, getting to pick up some of those more powerful enchantments are ways that you can kind of get, again, additional value and just kind of keep your card advantage train going. But the fact that this is a cheap flyer also means that a card like Optimistic Scavenger and all these powerful enchantments that you're playing just allow you to go really big, and you don't necessarily have to then return Nurturing Pixie with something like a Kaito or whatever the case may be. You can actually play Optimistic Scavenger, and you have a cheap flyer that you can play that as you're replaying all these enchantments, you're going to be able to put counters on creatures you control. In this case, putting one on the Pixie is going to be pretty sweet. The fact that it ends up being a 2/2 most of the time, and then you replay your enchantment, it's going to end up being a 3/3. There's just a lot of value there. So definitely a really cool card, and just seemed like kind of, I would say, innocuous at first, but really if your opponent plays this on turn 1 and really just one of these Optimistic Scavengers, and they just kind of get to do their thing over the course of the game, they're just going to add so much power to the board. God forbid there's like 2 or 3 of these that end up hitting the battlefield. Spiteful Hexmage is a pretty interesting one. It's a 1-mana 3/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you create a Curse Roll token attached to target creature you control. Now, this ends up being an enchantment, so you do trigger Eerie on the Optimistic Scavenger. It is something that you can pick up with any of your various bounce spells, plus like a Fear of Isolation. Unfortunately, the token does have to go on a creature you control, but a lot of these creatures are already 1/1s anyway, so if you end up putting the counter on, say, an Otter token or Nurturing Pixie or Optimistic Scavenger, they're already base 1/1s anyway, so they just get to keep the Curse Roll token, and eventually you can just end up getting rid of it. Even if you put on like a Fear of Isolation or on the Spiteful Hexmage, you kind of have something else that you can target to then bounce with some of your other very powerful bounce spells. You also have Fear of Isolation, which is kind of the last like creature based card that you can actually bounce these permanents with. So it's a 2-mana 2/3. This is maybe a little bit better depending on who you ask, just because as an additional cost to cast a spell, you have to return a permanent you control to its owner's hand, and you get a 2/3 flyer for 2, which is a pretty big flyer to say the least. And again, when you have something like an Optimistic Scavenger going, it is also an enchantment creature, so it will trigger the Optimistic Scavenger as well. So it ends up being like a 3/4 when you play it, and then of course up to a 4/5 if you have the mana to play, more than likely play the thing that you just bounced. But this card is going to be able to get around like counter spells necessarily in just trying to pick up other things. So that's kind of a neat little thing. I don't know if it's necessarily something that's super important, but I'm sure it probably comes up in enough instances where that does end up mattering. Finally, one of the other bigger bounce spells, and a card that I think a lot of people underestimated when Outlaws of Thunder Junction came out, and has slowly seen more and more uses, and just how great this card actually is this Townie Big Enough. 5 mana, and you can return up to 2 target land permanents to their owner's hand, but the spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a permanent you control. So a lot of the times, the secret mode on this card is just you pay 2 mana and bounce 2 of your own permanents, and that ends up being usually really good a lot of the time. Where this kind of got abused and is currently still abused is stuff like Up the Beanstalk, where you can just, bounce one of your expensive permanents and bounce one of your own opponent's permanents, draw a card, and then replay your thing, and then draw another card, whatever it is. In this case, in this deck, it's not necessarily the worst thing to bounce 2 of your own permanents to then just kind of get additional value. Bouncing 2 Hopeless Nightmares, 2 Storm Chasers Talents, one combination of the 2, a Nowhere to Run, or a Nurturing Pixie, whatever the case may be, and then just kind of continuing this loop of getting to kind of, again, card advantage out your opponent and get a lot of value from these very cheap enchantments and creatures that you're kind of playing. With this Townie Big Enough, if you end up having enough mana, you can play a Storm Chasers Talent, pay the cost to level it up, pick up this Townie Big Enough, and then you can bounce Storm Chasers talent and like another thing, and I think that's like 7 mana or something like that, where you can just kind of go through this loop of like play it, bounce a thing, and then you're gonna make a 1/1 every turn. You're gonna bounce one of your opponent's like best permanents every turn, and you're gonna pick up your best permanent and keep doing it until your opponent is able to disrupt it, which again will end up getting you some eerie triggers from your Optimistic Scavengers, and just put your opponent in a really tough position. You can even like bounce like 2 of your own things as well to get even more value out of it. A pretty sweet addition, Tithing Blade. It comes into play, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and you can craft it, but really just the fact that it's a edict effect on a permanent that is not very easily interacted with makes it a pretty good and appealing target for a lot of these bounce spells. Mana base, you're playing like 2 Restless Anchorage, 2/3 flyer. Whenever it attacks, you create a map token. Pretty sweet there. The rest of your deck is just a lot of these like pain lands and fast lands and things like that. Sideboard, you have Ghost Vacuum, 3 Destroy Evil, 3 No More Lies, 2 with the Witch's Vanity, which is a pretty interesting card to actually pick up, because then you can just play it, destroy a creature with mana value 2 or less, go to the next chapter, you make a food token, and then before you end up getting to chapter 3, just picking it back up and being able to destroy another creature with mana value 2 or less, make another food token, can kind of help you in racing situations, as well as again just being a repeatable like targeted removal spell. If something like Nowhere to Run, isn't able to get the job done, this is pretty good in the mirror, because again, eventually, Nurturing Pixies, Optimistic Scavenger, Fear of Isolation, those kind of cards are going to get enough counters on them with Optimistic Scavenger in play to where you're not going to be able to kill them with Nowhere to Run. And sure, you still have like Go for the Throat, but this is like a repeated way where your opponent's just not going to be able to go absolutely insane in the mirror matches with the Witch's Vanity. Of course, making food tokens as well kind of gives you another permanent to bounce if you don't really have anything else to pick up. But a lot of the time, too, you can just sacrifice this and gain 3 life and kind of help you in those racing situations. Another Tithing Blade, 2 Temporary Lockdown, and 2 Defiled Crypt / Cadaver Lab. This is a way that, with like a Pixie or a Fear of Isolation in the graveyard, you can play, something like Defiled Crypt, and then play Cadaver's Lab, make a 2/2, pick it back up, and just kind of reset this and be able to kind of loop through. You're totally fine with like trading with like Pixie or Fear of Isolation, because it's going to go back to the graveyard. You're going to pick it back up with the lab, and of course get another zombie with the Defiled Crypt, and it's like another way that you can kind of get your value in a sense. So that is the Esper self-bounce deck for Standard. This is a deck that a lot of players kind of consider a flash in a pan, and it seems like it is a mainstay of the Standard format, and has definitely proven that it just wasn't kind of a one-off thing. It went into one of the biggest Standard tournaments that we've seen in a very long time and performed very well. Different versions all around, but players seem to be opting for this kind of Esper version of the deck. There's a lot of good white cards, and of course like the blue-black cards are very powerful in the set. I mean, we've seen like Dimir midrange absolutely dominate the format for a while. And of course, now we kind of see like Esper and Dimir themselves kind of come into their own and kind of shape the metagame in their own way. But yeah, this deck's sweet. I would definitely consider playing it, I mean, is a lot of fun to me. It's a deck that kind of in a way solves the targeted removal, where I think some of the decks that go wide can really kind of beat some of those decks that are just trying to play the super efficient removal, and this does it in a way of like adding pressure to the board while also getting to rebuy those cards and just replay them to, again, remove your opponent's creatures. One removal spell is fine, but when you get to play that same 1, 2, 3 times in a row, it ends up being very, very good and ends up working out a little bit better in your favor. And the deck's awesome. Go ahead, play it. Standard's awesome. I'm going to keep saying that until they find a way to ruin Standard again. But, that's neither here nor there, and I'm super excited for Aether Drift as well. So that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Go or comment down below how you feel about this current Standard format. Maybe what do you even think about Aether Drift coming up as well, because we're going to be doing kind of a set review for that, going over some cards that I think are going to see plenty of play in some of these constructed formats. But, yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.